This is going to be a long video, and if you'd like to skip any reflections and criteria to get right to the list, head to the timestamp in the description. Looking back, 2023 was a very uneven year in the pro wrestling that I followed. So many times throughout, I found myself down on multiple promotions or the community as a whole. I first was considering doing a full year-end awards, but something like Promotion of the Year never sat right with me for the ones I followed closely. Spoilers for the list ahead, there's a lot of AEW matches, but I'd never consider them for Promotion of the Year due to their spell of creative missteps. I still found myself coming back for the actual wrestling matches, which is a fitting anecdote for my experiences elsewhere too. The matches are what the channel is based on after all, and since I've kept track of everything that I've watched this year, limiting myself to just Match of the Year makes the most sense. The criteria is simple, 30 of my favorite matches from the last 12 months. The placement of everything is all gut feeling after a revision period. There's no limit per wrestler or promotion, simply the matches I personally got the most out of. Just keep in mind that 30 matches is within 1% of everything that I did see, so if your favorite match didn't make it, that doesn't mean I'm hating on it. A lot of great matches were cut, and if I included everything that I really liked, this video would be way longer than it already has any right to be. And just a reminder, these opinions are coming from a disembodied voice over the internet, and it really isn't that deep. For honorable mentions, I won't be listing individual matches, but rather wrestlers, title reigns, and promotions that didn't end up making it onto the final list. I still wanted to show them some love. First is Sami Zayn. No Sami matches made it on the list, though I did really enjoy the Night 1 main event of WrestleMania, and the Roman Reigns title match was very good, if not hindered by the usual Roman title match booking patterns. Sami was the emotional core of WWE programming through WrestleMania, and the angle at the conclusion of the Royal Rumble was my favorite produced by WWE in years. Elio del Dr. Wagner Jr.'s GHC National Championship run. I've sung its praises a bunch on this channel. It was a bright spot for Noah's year, where Wagner frequently got good matches out of unfavorable opponents and had a very solid run in the N1 victory. Mercedes Moné. The Mayu Iwatani and Kairi matches were both late cuts from the list. Her Joshi run, though, was a glimpse into a different timeline, and I'm glad I got to see it happen. It's a shame that it was cut short due to injury, but I'm very happy with what we did get. Katsuyori Shibata. No Shibata matches made the list, though we got some really good stuff in his ROH Pure title run. From a sentimental point of view, I never thought I'd get to see him wrestle in person, and in 2023 I got to see him a few times, which was very special. The King of Gate tournament. No Dragon Gate made the list, but this tournament was awesome. I was invested in Big Boss Shimizu's path to the Dream Gate, despite how that turned out, and his matches with Kakuta and Minoru were both standouts. I also really enjoyed Yoshioka and Minoru's tournament match a whole lot as well. All Japan Pro Wrestling. Nothing from AJPW made the list, though Nakajima vs Miyahara and Violent Giants vs Strong BJ were right up there. All Japan was a promotion that I felt had higher floors than ceilings, and I rarely found a show of theirs that I regretted watching. And last but not least, Fujita Jr. Hayato. One of the most compelling stories in wrestling, unfortunately cut short by his recurring battle with cancer. I thought his UWF run in GLATE was very cool, and his marquee matches in Michinoku Pro were awesome. His poignant match with Hiromu Takahashi is a sentimental favorite. Get well soon, Hayato. And with all that being said, after watching 3,196 matches spanning 28 promotions, here are my favorite matches from 2023. A barn burner of a match from a pairing I like a whole lot. Putting this up against a fan favorite like Charlotte vs Rhea, you get a much tighter match between the work itself as well as the pacing. On paper, you'd think that Bianca and Iyo's athleticism would take center stage, though the first half of the match is dedicated to Iyo wearing down Bianca's arm to neutralize her strength. Iyo really shines here, both with her maneuvering and brutal creativity while in control. The Molten San Juan crowd is fully behind her, allowing for both personalities to shine through in response. The steady pacing leads to more bombastic moments, complemented by crisp counter sequences and the signature set pieces you'd expect from these Bianca title matches. It's far from perfect, Iyo inadvertently gets dropped on her face, and the interference won't be for everyone, but it's still very strong and the match that Iyo needed, showing WWE brass what so many of us had seen in her for years. It's my favorite offering from WWE's women's division in 2023 and can be found for free on their YouTube page. The match I was looking forward to the most after the tournament blocks were announced. Two of my favorite wrestlers scoring off for the very first time, who both happen to be hard-headed and very loud competitors. The match coincidentally fits that description as well. While Eddie Kingston delivered many emotional standouts this year, his G1 debut was about as straightforward as it gets. Shingo Takagi is the perfect opponent for what results in a 10-minute tough guy contest that kicks incredible amounts of ass. I couldn't ask for more than these two hurling themselves at each other until someone comes out on top. It's all complemented by the stubborn demeanor and barking that Shingo excels with, while both take their time to register all the strikes when called for. A standout moment was when the two decided to trade chops at each other's necks right before the finishing stretch. It's short, sweet, and a sentimental favorite of mine. You can find this entire show for free on New Japan World. The quintessential Dudes Rock slugfest from WWE's catalog. When I originally covered the match, my one complaint was that there wasn't enough Gunther here, but on rewatch, it's much more balanced than I remembered. It's a match that I think I took for granted, given that it was always in the conversation for one of the best of the year, but on repeat viewings, I'm reminded of why that's always been the case. They don't try to do anything overly ambitious or dramatic here. It leans into the more stubborn violence, garnering multiple standing ovations for these three just smacking each other incredibly hard. You still get your story beats between McIntyre and Sheamus as Gunther filters in and out, including one of my favorite finishing sequences all year. Gunther hits a splash from the top rope to break up a pinfall, followed by powerbombing Sheamus into Drew before one more powerbomb to close out a modern-day Mania classic. Like I said in the April video, this match is a testament to this violent style for not only translating, but greatly succeeding in a mainstream environment. My favorite Noah match from 2023 that involves two Noah contracted wrestlers. I'm pleasantly surprised this aged as well as it did, given that it exists in that strange space early in the year where the cheering restrictions in Japan were still upheld. From a sentimental point of view, it was the first match I covered in the monthly series, and I'm really glad I still get as much out of it 12 months later. Kaito Kiyomiya fights his career rival in Kenoh to validate his status as champion. It was the coming of age moment Kaito desperately needed, at least we thought at the time. Regardless, there are plenty of visual storytelling elements to complement this feud, as I explained in my January video. This match achieves in 19 minutes what a lot of modern big title matches aspire to do in 30 plus. There's no preliminary work that goes nowhere, they get right to the point and deliver all of the big offense and drama fitting of the GHC's reputation. The bombs are bright and loud, and the 50-50 exchanges feel massive, making for a proper modern title match that's fitting of the occasion. In hindsight, this feels like the series finale of Noah's pandemic run, as everything would begin to significantly change from this point. Though in a vacuum, it still serves as one of the very finest the arc had to offer this year. There's also a falcon arrow from the top rope to the ring apron, which is just cool as hell. I seem to be much higher on this match than a lot of people. When it comes down to it, I think it's one of the more outright enjoyable matches of the whole year. This functions as a wonderful showcase match. Both wrestlers are incredibly versatile and cover multiple areas of their arsenal as the match progresses. You begin with some great technical exchanges into some freakish displays of strength before it crescendos into a high-impact final third. Everything is done at an extremely high level and is just a joy to watch. With Lucha being one of my blind spots, a lot of the exchanges, specifically on the mat, were a breath of fresh air. Bryan Danielson waited a long time to test his skills against an entire generation of luchadors, and Bandido made sure to make good on that, meshing well with one of the greatest to ever do it. Who would have guessed that putting Bryan Danielson in exciting first-time matchups for a month would result in some of the best TV matches all year? Shuri spent the majority of 2023 as a sleeping giant. Aside from a Triangle Derby run and a showdown with Big Hash in April, she's had a quiet year after losing the World of Stardom Championship. When Suzuki signed a contract to become full-time with Stardom, these two were on a collision course, and boy did they collide. Suzu lives up to her crazy girl moniker by hitting her tequila shot finisher before the bell even rings. Shuri continues to bump like crazy on the ramp, amongst the ringside lighting rigs, and even takes a German from the apron to the floor. Starting the match like this not only presents Suzu as a viable threat, but establishes a chaotic feel to the match that never really goes away. When it settles into a more conventional brawl, Shuri is able to even the playing field with her ground game, leading to an explosive finale with no shortage of sickening bombs. She relies on her super finisher to put Suzu away, as she was pushed to the brink of an upset. I love a lot of the decisions made in the match. These two make for a great brawl, and with how the match begins, Suzu pulling off the upset never feels out of the question. It's 11 minutes of wonderful violence, and one of the very best from the World Wonder Ring in 2023. The peak of American women's wrestling in 2023 from one of my favorite feuds all year. It's the highlight of a monster campaign from Athena, who did the absolute most with what she was been given in Ring of Honor. The main event of Death Before Dishonor acts as the epic of the trilogy, and they delivered on that through the 20-minute runtime. Willow, Nightingale, and Athena trade all sorts of huge offense, even calling back to those that paved the way to dig deep for some sort of upper hand. Giving the O-face kick out to Willow was a great moment, and at that point I was hooked into thinking it was her night, until it wasn't. The finish was a nice payoff for anyone watching Athena's matches on the Honor Club weekly show, and even the final days of AEW Dark. She spent 2023 experimenting with different ways to win matches, running through all of her competition via knockout, pinfall, and submission. While on the top rope, she creates an opening to execute a second O-face, though forgoes the pinfall, incapacitating Willow with a crossface. This lines up so well with Athena's character. She's just as intelligent as she is brutal, to not even bother with the pin attempt. I thought this match and feud did a wonderful job of elevating Willow Nightingale, who looked formidable in defeat. I also can't help but wonder how this series of matches would have been perceived had they all taken place on AEW television. The match quality speaks for itself. I know not many were motivated to go out of their way for Ring of Honor, but I can assure you that this feud is well worth your time. This is how you do the WWE big match. Chad Gable is the perfect foil for Gunther in both style and character, and everything they do here just works so well. The stakes are elevated further as a win would push Gunther to the longest reign in Intercontinental Championship history. I really appreciate Gable's performance from the get-go. He's not only urgent, but gets across a sense of frustration in everything he does. He can't rely on a countout or a time limit expiring, like he did in their previous meetings. It's all expressed through his demeanor and body language without commentary having to point it out ad nauseum. The in-ring dynamic between these two remains great, Gunther being brutal in control and Gable mounting some tremendous comebacks. The way crowds have been conditioned to Gunther matches makes all the near falls feel massive, and the reception to every move creates an organic escalation of drama. It culminates in one of the best finishing stretches I can remember on WWE television, with brilliant counters, the ever-looming threat of Gunther's sleeper hold, and even a head drop. Gunther seals his historic reign with a lariat, sending Gable and his family home in tears. We've come a long way from Chad Gable eating pins in 6-minute tag matches. I hope they make good on his promise to find his way back to the champion next year. Give them time on a pay-per-view card, and I'm confident that they could surpass what was my favorite WWE match of the year. This was my come to Jesus moment with Astronauts. I took Golden Week in Japan as a chance to expand my tastes, and that included Big Japan's show on May 4th, specifically an overdue introduction to the much lauded team of Takuya Nomura and Fuminori Abe. Astronauts were always a team I've seen praised, but never took the time to seek out, and this was a here damn match for me. They defended the BJW tag titles in what was a 17-minute ass kicker against Hiroyuki Suzuki and Takuho Kato. Astronauts are the star of the show here, but the challengers hold their end of the bargain well. Suzuki holds the size advantage, and Kato brings a lot of fire to his team. Nothing here reinvents the wheel, it's just done at a very high level and with jaw-dropping intensity. Seek this one out, enjoy the fireworks, and look out for Suzuki breaking up a submission attempt with a German suplex. These things don't have to be complicated, especially when they're being thrown this hard at this speed. The most G1 feeling match of the entire tournament. Maybe it was due to the 4-block format, but I found the majority of the tournament underwhelming. Thankfully, this was not the case when Eddie Kingston faced Tomohiro Ishii in a red-hot Korakuen Hall. Kingston and Ishii could have easily just added another slugfest to their catalog, but instead we got something a little more three-dimensional. Granted, it still whips ass, though everything has a certain weight to it. Eddie enters the match carrying injuries from the rest of his block, specifically a bad back. This immediate disadvantage slightly alters the Ishii match formula, and Eddie provides an emotional core. Fighting spirit is often misconstrued for the tough guy competitions, but here it's presented in the form of Eddie having to fight through his pain. His performance resonates with the Korakuen audience as he forces his way through all of the punishment being dished out by Ishii. He did not come all this way to a tournament he's dreamed of participating in just to roll over and die. Through sheer will, he goes blow for blow with the Stone Pitbull, who at one point torpedoes himself head first into Kingston, which was just nuts. 3 minutes short of the time limit though, Ishii gets his first win of the tournament with his brainbuster. Leave it to the Mad King to walk into Korakuen and deliver a match befitting of the tournament's reputation. A match that shattered my expectations, admittedly. Not that I'm not a fan of these two, I just didn't think a main event between them would look quite like this. I'm really glad that it did though. I should preface this by saying I do have some in-person bias, as I was fortunate enough to attend All Out with my older brother. It was a weird night with everything overshadowing the event, but we left on a high note through the efforts of these two. We didn't have yet another match where Orange Cassidy faces the incredibly serious man with his off-putting tactics. Jon Moxley was not entertaining that whatsoever. He is so good as a bully here, getting genuine heat from the Chicago crowd. He spends the majority of the match dismantling Orange, leaving him in a pool of his own blood, and forcing him into a place he's rarely found himself in during his time in AEW. Between Cassidy's survival instincts kicking in, and Moxley trying a little too hard to prove a point, OC begins to fight back with all the conviction in the world. This is amplified by a crimson mask and bloodstained denim. A great wrestling performance is one that can make you believe, despite how obvious the result might be. Orange Cassidy made me believe on this night that he could pull this off, despite looking down the barrel for the entire match. Heading into this match, he was essentially held together by duct tape, and this acts as a last gasp of desperation to keep his precious title. Naturally, Mox spikes him on his head and takes the one thing he truly cared about. Orange Cassidy went out on his shield in defiance, and I think he greatly benefited from doing so until the international title scene got all convoluted, but that's not the point here. This was the high point of a title reign that is synonymous with the belt itself. One of those matches where it'll be way too high or way too low depending on your taste. I assess these matches in isolated cases, but for this one I actually watched both the January 4th match as well as the Forbidden Door rematch back to back, as going into this I've held the opinion of really liking the first and being very annoyed by the second. 6 months later and those opinions haven't changed, but I think on subsequent rewatches I appreciate what the first match has to offer a lot more, given the shortcomings of its sequel. The biggest differences are in pacing and knowing just what exactly they're trying to do with the match itself. Kenny returns to the Tokyo Dome as the cleaner and rare form with a vendetta and a bias to confirm. He's as eccentric and as explosive as we've seen in a very long time, and in the moment it felt like the Kenny of old had returned. The offense in the opening stages is pretty focused, going after Ospreay's back. He uses his awareness to take advantage of Ospreay's desperation early when he counters the Os-Cutter on the ring apron. Later, Ospreay once again pays for relying on something fancy like a Spanish fly when that attempt is countered into that gross DDT on the exposed turnbuckle. I found Ospreay blading in this environment genuinely shocking and greatly emphasized the stark beatdown. However, it does start to stray from here, as Ospreay tends to forget to sell his worn down back, and his fire up towards the end of the match feels very sudden instead of a last ditch effort to survive. Nonetheless, the action here is so great. It never feels inconsistent in tone, and for a guy who complains about a lot of long matches, I found this incredibly well paced for 33 minutes. I can't give it a higher compliment than that. It clearly won't be for everyone, though I do think a lot here is genuinely impressive. I can't stress that enough, given how much the follow-up abandons the ideas that worked here so well. A wonderful follow-up to their hate-filled brawl from February, trading the insane levels of violence for something a bit more structured and dramatic. It doesn't sacrifice the intensity by any means, as Nomura is brutal when in control of Tsukamoto's arm, and Takeda still acts as a catalyst for the faster-paced action. Tsukamoto was the standout for me here, as his sympathetic performance had Korakuen well behind him. Despite enduring so much punishment, he hung in there to pick up the victory and end Astronaut's 600-day-plus reign as tag team champions. These two teams have fantastic chemistry, and putting Tsukamoto in this spot makes for a feel-good moment to cap off a stellar tag match. Simple ideas, executed incredibly well. One of the great spectacles of the year. I think the way Christian Cage puts his matches together needs to be closely examined, this one being no exception. Here he expanded on a great TV match with Darby Allin over the summer, this time with a 2 out of 3 fall stipulation. Each fall is extremely memorable, ramping up in over-the-top antics and outright insanity. The high spots may be what stick out to many, but these two have really good in-ring chemistry. The first fall is 5 minutes of just good wrestling, where Darby is clever enough to pull Christian's turtleneck over his eyes, a subtle yet very effective way to get the advantage. Fall number 2 continues in this vein until Christian emphasizes that it doesn't matter how you get the falls. Combine this with Darby's proficiency of getting himself destroyed, and you get the infamous stare spot. It's interesting to think that while Christian does end up winning with interference, the more nefarious things he does are technically legal. It says nowhere in the rules that you can't drop a man shoulder first onto the stairs, nor that you can't nonchalantly remove the ring mats while the man is on a stretcher, only to jump onto that stretcher from the top rope. The third fall does get a little messy with the interference and a ref bump, but it's simply too ridiculous to look away. If you like the TV match more, I wouldn't blame you, but I think this is the most Christian Cage match of 2023, and my list would feel incomplete without the Father of the Year. Earlier in the list, I mentioned what a lot of modern main event title matches strive to do in a half hour, and I think this is the ideal version of that. Part David vs. Goliath and part student vs. mentor. The monstrous Yuji Okabayashi defends his championship against Yuya Aoki, who puts in one of my favorite underdog performances of the year. When I talked about this match in my May video, I actually didn't have the context that Okabayashi was Yuya Aoki's trainer, which adds a personal aspect to things. Given that this was the beginning of Okabayashi's farewell run, it stands as a nice passing of the torch moment. It feels big time, and it's paced like a modern epic with a slower opening exchange. Upon blasting each other with strikes outside, the pace quickens and rarely lets up. Every move feels significant, be it as simple as a Boston Crab or as extreme as rapid shoot headbutts. Okabayashi is great in his role due to his sheer stature, but he's deceptively athletic, bumping like crazy and flying through the air multiple times in the match. Aoki remains persistent, bleeding from the mouth, and tackles every obstacle in front of him successfully. I think some of the no-selling could put it off for some, though I interpreted it as a situation where Aoki simply would not be denied. Everything comes together here for a massive title clash from a pairing that works so well together. A brawl that feels pulled from a different time and place and dropped into modern weekly television. It is urgent and has a feeling of danger that few TV matches this year possessed. I didn't care for the count-out tease to start the match, but once Bryan is in the ring, Rush gets to work, and he isn't working by the hour. Rush is awesome in this hired gun role, battering the American Dragon from the jump. This isn't entirely over violence though, as Rush is seen going after the KT tape on Bryan's shoulder immediately. That is also emphasized when tossing Danielson's shoulder first into every single barricade in sight. He's left a bloody mess, and somehow this thing is propelled into another gear. There's of course the sequence where the two are just beating the hell out of each other on the apron before Rush hits a belly-to-belly suplex to the floor. Here you can notice some blood on the camera lens, which is this minor incidental thing that greatly complements the madness unfolding. Danielson fires back as a sympathetic babyface, as few can do as well as he can to secure his title match at Revolution. This just rules so damn much. It's the type of match that will make you want to run through a wall by the end of it. One of the great bloodbaths of the year, and a star-making performance for Swerve Strickland. The Texas death match between Moxley and Hangman was about pride and each man having a point to prove, though here it's simply two men going to unspeakable lengths to inflict harm on one another. This grudge match quickly becomes a display of shock horror when Hangman introduced a staple gun and duct tape. Swerve's very upfront about incorporating these influences into his work, and I think this is the most effective application. I mean, it's hard for a blood-drinking spot not to be. Hangman's lust for vengeance gets the better of him, which allows Swerve to be free of his restraints. At this point, he's completely embracing the staples and is a bloody mess. I wish they stuck with this direction a bit longer, though when they get into a more conventional deathmatch pace, it's still insane. The pile driver on the barricade, the 450 complemented by broken glass, and the various use of barbed wire make for some of the most striking visuals all year. Swerve Strickland hanging Adam Page capped off an unforgettable experience. I'm amongst the opinions that the interference did hinder things a bit. It felt excessive with Nana at ringside the entire time, and I just don't see why he couldn't have incorporated the table earlier. Regardless, it's left an undeniable impression on many, myself included. Thankfully, AEW did not make the same mistake with Swerve going forward, like they did with Hangman back in March. It's clear that Swerve is destined for greatness in 2024. On a night full of title matches and story payoffs, this match was all about proving who is the baddest. To reinforce this idea, the stipulation was added to where this would only end by knockout or submission. Like I said earlier, Shuri had a pretty quiet year, stepping back to work on her God's Eye faction after losing the red belt. Though when not focused on her unit, she aspired to seek out the strongest competitors across the globe to test her skills. Enter Chihiro Hashimoto, somebody completely unique from anyone on the Stardom roster. She's one of the most formidable in the entire Joshi scene, who has beaten Shuri in the past, recently leaving Mirai and Himeka in her wake. These two have legitimate backgrounds in amateur wrestling and MMA, and the differences play into the strategy. Shuri is more skilled in striking, and Big Hash has the advantage in strength and in her ground game. That isn't to suggest she's a slouch with her strikes, as at one point is repeatedly clubbing Shuri with a smile on her face. There's enough here between the big fight feel, the mat work, and all of the high-impact offense to make a great spectacle fitting of Stardom's biggest ever show. This match provides a different type of action from Stardom's main event scene, and I think it gets the best out of Shuri here. It's pretty cut and dry, but I really loved it. A genuine ass kicker that makes her my Stardom match of the year. This match is insane. The sequel in December functions better as a wrestling match, though this one places above it simply for how unique it feels and for the reaction it got out of me. Similarly to their match I spoke of earlier, this starts with Abe and Takeda on the mat, and it's when Nomura and Tsukamoto enter the ring, a slap to the face initiates an exchange where the two progressively tee off on each other with increasingly cynical strikes. Abe gets his pot shots in, which Takeda takes exception to, and every broken pin attempt, somebody catches a stray. This boils to a point where Abe mocks the deathmatch veterans by sliding them a chair, and the entire match falls apart. A heated brawl on the outside gets the match thrown out, and after other wrestlers from the locker room get everyone separated for a restart, Nomura, far too big for his boots, introduces a box of light tubes. This figuratively and literally blows up in their face as astronauts get their asses beat and are submitted by the Crazy Lovers. I can't think of another match from 2023 that feels like this one does. The pettiness and malice leaps off of the screen, and that's complemented by all the vicious striking. Astronauts ask stupid questions and get stupid answers. I doubt my words can do it justice, so check this one out on the BJW movie YouTube. By process of elimination, this lands as my tag team match of the year. I said in a previous video that I'm not sure if this was a down year in general, or if I simply didn't do a good enough job of seeking out tag wrestling in other places, though getting acclimated with Astronauts' work has been a bright spot. Eddie Kingston said himself that he learned to embrace his confidence throughout the course of the Continental Classic. I think this match is the biggest and most powerful example of that. Bryan Danielson's 2023 has consisted of great babyface performances, though he's never shaken his condescending view of Eddie Kingston. In the interviews leading up to the match, Danielson tells us that Eddie will give him the middle finger, and the match will essentially be over. He was right, though not in the way he assumed. We get to that point through a total war, as both literally risk their necks to get to the final. It's incredibly physical, but never in a one-dimensional way. The high stakes of the tournament are there, and combining that with the personal conflict makes everything more impactful. Once again in the Continental Classic, Eddie Kingston doesn't lose sight of the mission, using Danielson's words against him. He turns his middle finger into a clever reversal of the Busaiku knee, clinching a berth in the final while exercising one more demon in the process. A lot of matches these days aspire to be a physical epic, but few bring both competitors to tears. This was the highlight of a fantastic debut for the Continental Classic. Of all of the inter-promotional crossover in Japan this year, nothing felt as significant as this. After 3 years, Kaito finally gets his match with Okada, on the grandest stage of the Tokyo Dome no less. In order to get to this point, Kaito awakened a nastier side of the Rainmaker, highlighted by the angle at Wrestle Kingdom in Yokohama Arena. In a run of Okada Dome matches that were very by the numbers at this point, this was a breath of fresh air. It's way more concise, and some good old-fashioned hatred nicely complemented all the bombastic action you'd want in a Dome epic. Kaito Kiyomiya wrestles a strong match here. He's prepared for Okada's signature offense in this environment, and even gets an opening to neutralize the Rainmaker. When Okada is in control, Kaito never fails to step back up, but it's simply a matter of who he's stepping up to. We get the glimpses of the grumpy Okada that was so entertaining this year, but this performance is more indifferent, as if walking into the Tokyo Dome and handling business is this minor inconvenience for him. He is still extremely petty by the end, cutting the pinfall short and hitting Inoki and Misawa tributes to end the match disrespectfully on his own terms. On this day in the Tokyo Dome, Kaito Kiyomiya posed a genuine threat at times, but it just wasn't enough. I can only hope that they revisit this soon, as I think all of the pieces are there for a generational feud. My placement of this match also takes the semifinals into account, so keep note of that. I still think that there's a lot to love here in a vacuum. The King of DDT final was a great conclusion to an underdog run for Chris Brooks that would propel him all the way to the KOD Openweight title. After defeating the living legend Jun Akiyama, Brooks has to face a reawakened monster in Kazusada Higuchi. Higuchi bulldozed through the opposition to get to the semi-final, though walks into the last round as a wounded beast. Yukio Ueno did extensive damage to Higuchi's arm in a losing effort. This gives Brooks a clear target, and if he has any chance to win, he needs to follow through. Brooks does get at the arm initially before Higuchi fights out of it, and when things go to the outside, we get a ton of over-the-top violence, primarily involving a swing-out door to the Korakuen Hall bleachers. The important part from this is Higuchi getting his arm and shoulder jammed in that door, though the sequence that lives rent-free in my head is Brooks ripping it off the hinges and making the mistake of bashing it into a greater weapon that is Kazusada Higuchi's skull. Higuchi, completely unfazed, would then batter him with palm strikes and headbutts. When back in the ring, a bloodied Chris Brooks has no choice but to step up to Higuchi and go blow for blow. The ensuing stretch has all the twists and turns you'd want in a tournament final, leading to Brooks trapping the arm and submitting one of the best on the planet. I get the criticism of it maybe going too long or maybe one too many near falls, but even on subsequent rewatches, I'm never taken out of it. Another fantastic performance from Higuchi, and a wonderful moment for the Baka Gaijin to cap off my favorite tournament final of the year. Watching Saree's return to Japan this year played a great part in expanding my taste in Joshi. Her Beyond the Sea title match against Arisa Nakajima was the centerpiece of this run. I saw the potential in the preview tags, but the full version in Korakuen Hall left a great impression on me through the sheer violence of it all. It starts as many big title matches would, with both attempting to grind each other down, but Nakajima grows more and more cynical while in control. Saree eventually hits a double stomp to Nakajima's arm on the entranceway, and this boils over into an incredibly hostile fight. These 27 minutes feature some of the nastiest striking I've seen and heard this year. Every time I thought they'd reach the peak of their intensity, they'd continue to escalate until Saree sealed the win with a headbutt and her straitjacket exploder. I said in my August video that as this went on, it felt less like a performance and more of a knockdown drag-out fight for the right to call themselves champion. There are many slugfests on my list, but I believe this is the only one that left each competitor with their faces swollen. Long live the Sun God, and get well soon, Arisa Nakajima. I don't know CM Punk, nor do I know his former employers, nor was I present at Wembley Stadium on August 27th. This is not a commentary on anything that went down before All In went on the air, or anything between Punk and the Elite. What I will say is I think CM Punk vs Samoa Joe at Wembley Stadium is a wonderful wrestling match, and the perfect opener for a stadium show. You send out a man who will get the most feral reaction from an already fired up crowd to conclude one of the most important feuds of the 2000s. They could have just skated on that sentiment alone, but that's just not how these two operate. The match itself has so much personality to it. The character work is great, be it Joe's disdain for Punk, and Punk stooging for a lot of Joe's offense to the delight of the Wembley audience. There's the callbacks to their prior matches, touching tributes to Terry Funk, and the work itself is rock solid. It feels like every step is feeding into the atmosphere around them rather than following a checklist. I could see why the more comedic bits would take someone out of this, but to me, I couldn't help but feel happy for these guys who have come a long way from wrestling in the field house to hamming it up at the home of football. Punk finally gets a decisive win over Joe, which now in hindsight was probably the last ever usage of the Pepsi Plunge. Punk vs Joe is a match that feels timeless, but it was always doomed to exist in an isolated time and space. The reaction to this match nowadays is often hyperbolized as a topic of discourse, but I still believe that it has its merit and will obviously appeal greatly to anyone who holds this legendary feud in reverence. My television match of the year. I can't think of a more ideal pairing for this type of match, as Joe is legitimately threatening and Darby has a proficiency in getting obliterated. It's a spectacle of car crash violence, though through no shortage of thought and creativity. Off the bat, Darby rushes Joe in a jacket adorned in thumbtacks, and Joe counters accordingly by shielding his lariats with his towel. From there, Darby throws himself at Joe strategically to bust him open, which only angers him, and you get the expected ragdolling this pairing is so good at. By the time Joe yeets Darby into the crowd and onto the concrete steps, we get one of the better examples of a picture-in-picture break to get the match back into the ring seamlessly. From this point, Darby targets Joe's eye to get back into this, though Joe brings him back down to earth in more and more sickening ways. These range from simply just dumping him to the floor, to dropping him onto the backrest of chairs, to an avalanche muscle buster onto the exposed ring boards. You can find better wrestling matches on TV this year, but for what this offers with the dynamic between these two and the sheer absurdity of its stunt show elements, there wasn't a televised match in 2023 that was burned into my brain quite like this one. This match is certainly more powerful for the story it tells, but it also needs the shock value and violence that was advertised for it all to work so effectively. Luckily we got both, and I was glued to my screen for the entire 26 minutes. With the build pondering what it means to be a man, and Moxley hiding behind his own reputation, a pinfall loss to Hangman Page has spiraled into a Texas deathmatch blow-off. Sticking with that narrative, Moxley incorporates nearly all the weapons himself. He's comfortable here and dare I say overconfident. Hangman frequently uses them in a more defensive way. Mox on the other hand is here to prove a point and cause as much destruction as possible. Case in point, the introduction of the bricks, the chain, and especially the use of the fork, which by all accounts is still an insane visual for a mainstream wrestling setting. This is all strung together with excellent pace. It may be a parade of spots, but doesn't always feel like it. I appreciate that after 20 odd minutes of plunder, that some of the sickest shots between the two are lariats. Hangman dished out 2 of those to Moxley, who at this point slung a chain over his shoulder for leverage, but it ended up being his undoing. In one of my favorite moments in wrestling this year, Adam Page has Jon Moxley hung over the ropes and he has no choice but to submit. In my opinion, this should have been a major moment in Hangman's development. Unfortunately, it led to him taking a back seat in a very long BCC Elite feud. Nonetheless, in the context of this singles feud and this match, I think there's no stronger conclusion than Jon Moxley tapping out in his own dominion. There are matches that are designed to leave you disappointed, and they're not always done right. An example of this is the Sami Zayn-Roman Reigns match. While a very good match, got to that outcome through convoluted means. I think the first Eddie-Claudio match this year was an example of that outcome done correctly and in turn extremely powerful. With the Continental Classic in hindsight, it acts as a match that would set the rest of Kingston's year in motion. In the March video, I mentioned that Eddie's motivation a lot of the time wasn't always the victory, but rather taking a pound of flesh. This is not the case here with the Ring of Honor World Championship and a 15-year-old grudge over respect on the line. Unsurprisingly, it starts hot, though Eddie actually has a game plan that works pretty well, targeting Claudio's knee. Claudio is traditionally the better wrestler, but he can always rely on his freakish strength to get him out of trouble. Unfortunately, old habits die hard, and Claudio is able to antagonize Eddie. The longer the match goes on, the more he unravels in his own rage. There's so much furious offense in this match that feels incredibly earnest coming from Eddie Kingston and more calculated on Claudio's side. It culminates in some awesome near falls and a cruel twist of fate for Eddie Kingston. In a blistering final exchange, Kingston reverses the Ricola Bomb with a Hurricane Rana, though the champion rolls through at the last second to escape with the victory. The reversal in this finish would become this canonical moment that has already been referenced multiple times since. A poignant ending to a gargantuan title match, and the highlight of WrestleMania weekend. You never know what these perceived dream matches will look like until they happen. Even if they've met before, the time and setting are far different. Zack Sabre Jr. and Bryan Danielson lived up to that billing, providing technical excellence on a major stage. The first half of the match is as advertised. Fluid technical wrestling done at an insanely high level, using holds I don't think I've ever even seen before. With Zack in control on the arm, he becomes more cynical, and Bryan is able to turn it around by getting Zack to lose his temper. Zack can go hold for hold with the American Dragon, but going blow for blow is a different story. For 23 minutes, and never leaving the ring at that, there is little wasted movement. More striking is introduced, though they never abandon their technique, it's just done at a frenetic pace. In a year filled with bloodbaths and plunder brawls, the joint manipulation and limb work done here was able to convey pain in a much more grounded way, which I thought was really nice to see in such a high profile match. The way Zack sold that dragon screw especially was a gross exception. Giving Danielson the comeback and victory through striking leaves the question in the air of who the better technical wrestler was, and at time of recording we'll find out in a few weeks. If the rematch is anything like this, I'm sure I'll have plenty to say about it. I said in the October video that there will be many who are more inclined with this style and these wrestlers that will have great things to say about this match. I think that rings true, especially now with a lot of year-end stuff coming out. This will be a popular pick for match of the year among that crowd, and to be honest, I don't really have an argument against it. You like technical wrestling? Here's some of the best grappling exchanges all year. You like striking? Here's two guys punching each other in the face and hurling themselves at each other head first. Do you like stories told through the work? Here's two tag partners trying to figure each other out in an exhibition that calls back to a bygone era. There's some light-hearted moments as well that bring the human element into things, and plenty of details to comb through on repeat viewings. It's an excellent wrestling match, but I also think it's an incredibly significant one for the reception it received. The morning after this aired in America, so many in the wrestling sphere were fixated on the Tuesday night ratings war when Dynamite went against NXT and were focused on anything but the actual wrestling. As this match started to generate buzz through more prominent voices in the community, so many were dropping whatever they were doing to seek this out and ended up loving it. To me, it's the best example of how the wrestling community should function, as for so many, they stumbled across two wrestlers they may have never seen, or in my own experience, got a crash course in the battle art style through this show, and was introduced to some of the great enthusiasts who are promoting it. Takuya Nomura and Fuminori Abe cultivated all of that through simply sharing something they love, and that might be my favorite part about it. If you want to hear me talk more about the match, check out my October video. And if you're asking why I didn't have it at number 1, it's pretty simple. I've never been somebody to go with my head over my heart. There are matches this year with better grappling, there's matches with more blood, and certainly matches with better builds. Despite all of that, it would have been dishonest of me to put anything else in this spot. This could simply come down to in-person bias, but when I think of my time as a wrestling fan in 2023, I think of this match and what I was feeling during it. In short, it's a match that reminded me of why I love this stuff in the first place. Bryan Danielson and Ricky Stark's strap match is fantastic, and it's everything I want out of my American wrestling. The story is a simple one. Ricky Starks faces the consequences of his actions towards Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, with Bryan Danielson standing in for the recently fired CM Punk. The real-life circumstances give Starks a massive chip on his shoulder. He's able to not only put on a stellar heel performance, but express himself through his work, pushing it to a career performance. The conviction in everything he does is rooted in such a genuine place, and when that is palpable without crossing into weird shoot territory, it makes for something special. It also helps when your backup is the American Dragon, whose ability to garner sympathy meshes perfectly with Ricky Stark's smarmy demeanor. Starks rushes Danielson before tied down to the strap, dog-walking him around the ring, and draws first blood. The pieces are already in play for a massive comeback, though it is earned through uncompromising violence. The favor is returned when Starks is carried away taunting Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, and by this point, both men are in the center of the ring, clobbering each other with the strap. They have to fight for every inch while tethered to one another, providing some incredible visuals through their facial expressions and all the marks left by the leather. The energy in the United Center when Bryan Danielson fired up is something I'll never forget. Ricky Starks did not roll over and die in the face of the American Dragon. He went out as loud as he entered the match. Between the individual performances, the sheer brutality, and all the real-life circumstances, a perfect storm was created. No other match this year made me feel the way this one did, and sometimes that is the only reason I need to place it at the top of my list. Ricky Starks vs. Bryan Danielson from AEW September 3rd is the Matches Worth Watching 2023 Match of the Year. And I managed to get through all of that without mentioning that Bryan Danielson pulled this off with one arm. And that is it from me. If you got this far into the video or even skimmed through it, thank you so much. This was by far the longest video I've done, and I now understand how much work goes into making these kind of list videos. I can't stress enough that there are hundreds of wrestling channels out there, so spending this chunk of your time with me means a whole lot. If you enjoy this sort of thing, I recently started a weekly series for 2024 talking about my favorite matches as they happen. Additionally, you can find me on Twitter and on Blue Sky at OuterStevan. Let me know what your match of the year was in the comments below, and I wish you all the very best in 2024.